Yes, welcome to this webinar on how to conduct a literature review. From the outset, I do want to emphasize that this session covers a very broad overview of what you can expect from a literature review. So it's not faculty specific, it's not discipline specific, but you should be able to take away some tips and guidelines here that you will be able to apply to any literature review in any discipline. All right, so as Leclerc mentioned, my name is Kuchner van Deventer. I'm the manager for research data services at the library. I was previously the manager in the research commons, and I kind of inherited this presentation from that role. So, and with me, along with the cloud, will be Heila Mare, our faculty librarian for theology. She will be monitoring the chats as well. So I'll also keep an eye on the chats where possible, but I will allow for Q&A sections as we progress. Okay, so the first thing in the chat section of Teams, you will notice I posted a couple of links. So here's this question that I'm asking. When you hear the phrase literature review, what is the first word or emotion that comes to mind? So that is question one. If you'll click on that link and just quickly fill out the first word that comes to mind for you, we can have a look at that result in a minute or two. So I'll just give you some time to do that. Can you see the links now? I just realized I was muted now. My apologies for that. But yeah, the results are coming in quite well. Can I also just ask everybody to ensure that your microphones are muted? And Leclerc, will you also please just check on your side who it is that's not muted? Okay, so research seems to be the predominant one with 5 responses there, but we've got overwhelming anxiety.
Sorry, Gichna, you are muted.
I believe somebody might have muted me in the process now. Okay, so yeah, research seems to be the main one coming through, but lots of reading. There was anxiety and overwhelming. And that is kind of what I was expecting, is that a lot of people find this to be a very daunting process. And it's understandable. I mean, ultimately, it is a lot of reading that will take place. But if you work carefully and you manage to identify only that material that really, really, truly speaks to your thesis, then you will only have to read what is absolutely relevant. So this webinar will, to an extent, show you how you can take those steps, how you can really identify the relevant literature and make the informed decisions. So the main thing that you need to understand about what a literature review is that your task is to build an argument. It's not a library. You're not expected to provide hundreds of sources because hundreds of sources are available. It's rather that those sources that you use are best suited to support your argument and that support your argument and your thesis. So I'm going to start with this little overview, which is our AI research assistant at the library. It's a tool that can help you also to find relevant information. So with the question, what is a literature review? Let's go back to the website and let's go to the library homepage. I'm going to share the link to the homepage in the chat as well. And now it's a bit hidden away at the moment with our new website. But if, for instance, you type in a topic, and I'm just going to type in literature reviews now. And I'm going to say search. It will take us to our Primo system, which is our search platform for our catalog. And here at the top, if you click on Research Assistant, you will be asked to sign in. My details should be fine. You have to sign with your university credentials. And then here we can type the question. What is a literature review? And here you'll get a decent summary. Let's see if we can zoom in a bit. So literature review is an academic exercise that involves systematically examining a body of scholarly literature to develop insights, critical reflections, and identify future research directions or questions. It serves multiple purposes, including supporting research projects, doctoral studies, dissertations, or standalone studies, and can be applied across various disciplines and research paradigms. So I'm not going to read all of it, but this is just a fairly good overview. And here you'll see it links to specific sources as well. Now, you can, if you want to find out whether we have access to that source, you can click here on more details and request options, because this tool does work with a catalog that is beyond what we also necessarily have available, but it does try to draw mostly from what we have access to. And remember that if we don't necessarily have access to it, then you can always request it via interlibrary loans. Okay, I do see a question there about do we need to declare this library research AI in the declaration form when submitting? So I'm actually going to steer away mostly from AI questions. I will touch on that just now. But what I can say is if you're going to use it to find sources, then it shouldn't be necessary. But if you are going to use this here and paraphrase it or incorporate it into your writing, then you will have to declare it. And remember, you cannot use AI as the source or the author. You have to still go and find out what exactly this person said that supports this statement. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Well, here's that second question. So it does have access. This platform has access, but the library doesn't have access. So just keep that in mind. All right. So going back to the presentation, let's just carry on to the next page. So, and this is where what I want to say about questions for AI. I'm going to be focusing on the traditional approach for literature reviews here because you do need that understanding in order to build your literature review. So there isn't enough time to really comprehensively go into AI in this discussion. But we do have a library guide available, and let me share that link again as well, where you'll find practically all the answers that you require. So I've just pasted that link again, and just to give you an overview of the library guide. So here it is. It's got our policies and resources, disclosure of AI tools, what is required for undergraduates and postgraduates, different tools that's available that you can look at, AI literacy as well, how to use AI responsibly, AI use in thesis and dissertations, AI in research, copyright and ethical considerations, and then also these workshops that are on offer. So on the library side, we've got a couple of webinars available. You just need to go to the Smart Student training schedule to see the AI training courses that's available. But the postgraduate office will have some, the Center for Teaching and Learning and the Division for Research Development have got AI-focused workshops that do get offered throughout the year. All right. Okay, so now let's move on to the second question, and this will be the last for the interactive ones. But let me just share that one as well, and then we'll get full on into the presentation. So the question is, which part of the literature review process do you find the most daunting? Okay, so formulating keeps refreshing, so that makes it a bit tricky. So let's look at individual results. Okay, so here's the questions formulating a clear focus research question seems to be about third in place. The two managing. Okay, let's wait a second just to get some more filled in. All right, it looks like it's got paused. So yeah, synthesizing and managing the info, the sources seems to be the two that's getting the most clout. But then I see there's in the chat, we've got a couple as well, organizing the literature into a cohesive story. So they will be talking about the golden thread, screening phase, creating and finding a system in which to save information from the various sources that I use. Their EndNote would be a very great tool to use. Developing themes, powerful software to use, and best sections of journal articles with a relevant reference into a Word document, and they're organizing it according to a theme. Okay, so I think for most of these, we'll actually be covering a couple of tips that could be useful. Right, so our understanding of the literature review is a 7-step process. Step 1 is to identify your question. Step 2, review discipline styles, which is very important because different faculties, different disciplines have different approaches to literature reviews. Step 3, searching the literature, then managing the literature, critically analyzing and evaluating it, then synthesis, and then ultimately writing the review. Okay, so most of you as postgraduates would probably already have your topic in place, but we do sometimes still have people who's really at the starting phase of their project. They might have a rough idea of what they want to investigate, so we still cover this section. So yes, if you have your topic in mind, you can refine it by searching on databases and just reading and finding some background information to see what has already been written on the topic and what gaps and issues there are regarding it. Wikipedia even is useful here. A conversation with an AI would be useful here as well, just to get an overview of the topic and see what has been discussed. But just remember that's never just sufficient on its own. And once you've now got this idea of gaps and issues, you can start narrowing down, and you should know by now what your topic is about to start developing your research question. So to narrow it down even further, let's say it's still too broad, you can ask yourself these 6 generalistic questions that can help you narrow the focus from a broad topic to a specific question. Who? Are you interested in a specific group of people, a specific demographic? Can it be narrowed down by gender, sex, age, ethnicity, etc.? Are there any key figures related to the topic? The what? What are the issues surrounding your topic? Are there subtopics? And in looking at background information, did you notice any gaps or questions that seemed unanswered? And where? Can your topic be narrowed down to a geographic location? And don't get too narrow here, otherwise you might not find enough results. But this is also, again, it's very dependent on the type of study that you do. I mean, if you are studying a very specific subspecies of frog that's only found in a certain area, then that question becomes moot. But it all depends. And here you have to contextualize your questions for your own field, for your own study. The when, is your topic current or historical? Is it confined to a specific time period? And was there a causative event that led your topic to become an area of study? Here we can think about COVID and just the vast amount of research that sprang from the pandemic and new fields of study and new approaches that were made. And then the why question. It can also be considered the so what question. So why are you interested in this topic? And then why should others be interested in it? And that also forms part of your thesis, is that you have to convince not just your supervisor and your examiner, but potentially anybody else who wants to read your research that this is impactful, that it is worth being interested in. So step 2 that we're going to look at is to review the discipline styles. And I will share these slides afterwards, or the cloud will share them for me. So you will have access to these links as well. But let's go to the library homepage again. Oh, that's the wrong one. Apologies. Okay. So to find our repository, you'll click here on Find. And then you'll look for SU research outputs and specifically e-theses. All right, so now you'll see the spaces are separated by faculty. So I'm going to look at engineering. And now you'll see that it even goes broke and it gets broken down into specific departments. So you can really go and find theses and dissertations that speak to your specific discipline. Let's look at mechanical and mechatronic engineering. And here you'll see there's even a breakdown. Okay, so we've got master's degrees, we've got doctoral degrees, and other sources. And by the way, these could oftentimes be very valuable sources for your own research. So don't discount them. And this is something to keep in mind, that a general Google Scholar search probably won't necessarily provide you with these results. So let's go and look at master's degrees. And let's look at the most recent one that has been published. Oh, it's quite large, so let's just download. All right. And now to find out, basically just to get an idea of what the literature review will be, where it should be. And here you can see it's in chapter 2, and there's an overview of what's covered in the literature review. So this is just an example, but this would be the best way for you to get an idea of what your discipline expects from you in terms of literature reviews. All right. So before continuing, let me just check. Are there any questions? And you're welcome to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question over the microphone.
I'm not sure, Kechna, if you can view the chat, but there was a comment on Atlas TI.
Oh, yes, I noticed that was, I think, as part of the daunting question. What I can say is there is training offered by the Postgraduate Office for Atlas TI. And as far as I know, it's the only training that is offered at the moment at the university, and it does fill up quite quickly. And Clau, if you can maybe add a link to that training, that would be great. Then what I can also mention is there will, we will also probably have a training session on Atlas AI, a more basic one during our research week, but that will only be in May. Okay, could you please outline the fundamental differences between a literature review for the purposes of a research proposal and that for a PhD thesis? I suppose the comprehensiveness of it, I would say. That to an extent, okay, so the proposal will already have your thesis and your research question, but you will also need to supply some literature that supports the justification. So I think the focus also would be on let's say you've identified a gap in the literature that hasn't been answered adequately. You will need to provide some kind of literature review that speaks to that specifically outlines how this proposal will lead to valuable research. Yes, the second question, are there copies of MPhil dissertations done at the business school at the SU Libraries site? Yes, they will probably be under economic and management sciences, and I'm fairly certain you'll find them there. We can quickly double check. Should be fairly easy to navigate. So economic and management sciences, let's see. Yeah, so if you go to the very last page, you'll see University of Stellenbosch Business School, and then you'll just have to look at the MPhils will fall under master's degrees. So it will likely be around here. Okay, there's only one result, so that's not ideal. But I'll take note of that and follow up and maybe and get that information for you. You can also, and this is actually where we're going to go next, is the person who will probably be best suited to provide you with an answer to that question. Okay, so the next question there, this is kind of what the this webinar is about. So I will be getting to that section on how to structure your literature review as well. All right, so back to the slide. And yeah, so it's on searching the literature, but also, as mentioned, I mean, if you need more information on how a literature review should be structured in your faculty, get to know your librarian. They are the best suited individuals to assist you with guidance on finding literature, developing a search strategy, identifying the keywords, and all those matters. But remember, they don't do it for you, they do it with you. Right, so same story, just one more jump back to the website. And let's just click on home. You'll have to get there, you'll click on find, and then you'll see if you click here on your faculty librarian, that's one option where you'll get the contact person for each faculty. Here you'll see we've got for agri-science, arts and social sciences, all the faculties are covered here. But the other useful resource that we have is our library guide. So I already introduced you to the artificial intelligence one. But for each subject and each discipline at the university, there is a corresponding library guide. And that you can, yeah, so if you click on it, so let's go to project management, you'll get a lot of information on useful journals, which databases you should consult, guidance on referencing, and also the person to contact if you have further, if you need further assistance. Okay, so I do see that question. Instead of plain sentence or question, is it allows to use provocative language in developing research titles? I honestly don't know. That is something you will have to clarify with your supervisor and with your department on what they consider acceptable and not. I do believe that is something that varies from department to department. Okay, so back to the slide. Right, so we've covered the library guide and how this will also be a useful resource for finding information for your literature review. So search strategies. Now, to create a search strategy, you combine keywords and use advanced search options or operators that speak directly to the database. And all our academic databases have these functions in place so that you can do a very specific search to find the most accurate results for your research. And to tips on how to create the strategies, you can use the search help function, use the advanced search options, or consult with your librarian again. On how to use Boolean operators, how to identify the correct keywords to use, and how to create search strings to use when searching on databases. So an example, so the strategy basically you start with identifying possible keywords, then constructing the strategy, then identifying the relevant databases, and then performing your search. So before we go to library search, I actually wanted to just give you this example of a search strategy. So an investigation into the impact of generative artificial intelligence on academic integrity and research methodologies in higher education in South Africa. So if that would be the title of the thesis, you can break it down and look at what the keywords will be. All this can go away. The and, the end, and on, those aren't relevant. Generative artificial intelligence, academic integrity, research methodologies, higher education, and South Africa, those would be the keywords in this instance. Then the search string that you would develop would be looking at variations of terminology. Can I just please ask again, everybody, to ensure that your microphones are muted? Okay, it looks like everybody's muted again. Okay. Yeah, we are quite a large group, so it is a bit difficult for us to monitor. So please try and ensure that it's muted. Okay. So the search string, as I mentioned, will look at variations of the terminology. So for instance, we've got AI, we've got generative AI or Gen AI or LLM. And here, if we look at academic integrity or ethic or bias or reproducibility, those little asterisks there at the end, they serve as very specific functions. So they basically say, okay, well, look, I'm looking for all words starting with those letters. Anything in quotation marks, it will look for that exact phrase, not the two words jumbled together or separate. But basically, it will look for South Africa and just that. So it won't look for South or Africa, for instance, as two separate concepts. So, okay, I just quickly want to copy this search string just to show you what results you get. Let me just minimize and why once it's, there we go. And why such a, and this basically gives an indication of why such a search can really be beneficial to finding the most accurate information. So I've copied it and I'm pasting that entire phrase just like that into this chat. And I'm going to say search. It worked yesterday, so I really hope it works now. Yes, but it's quite a lot. I just want to double check something because yesterday, and this is also not a typical thing, and there's why it's useful to always do these with a librarian to help you, is yesterday I only had 13 results when I did this search. So something has gone wrong in the meantime, but that's how it happens. I'm not going to go into too much detail or try to figure out what went wrong in the meantime. But yeah, as I said yesterday, I had 13 results that were very specific and spoke specifically to the topic that I was investigating. But it can be the tiniest little thing, as I said, and it will depend. And that is where it's useful to have a faculty librarian sit with you and develop this search string. All right. But yes, so, and I mean, even for, as I mentioned, there's multiple databases, and there is obviously Google Scholar that you can use as well. It's not that we say you shouldn't, but our advice always is to not just use Google Scholar. It does give a lot of results, but a lot of those results are oftentimes hidden by very irrelevant results that pop up first, just because of how their search system works. Okay. So, yeah, in managing your literature, there's a couple of phases involved. There's basically collecting and selecting the literature. So you've identified the databases and you've done a preliminary search and you've identified quite a lot of sources that you need to work through. And there it will then be helpful for an inclusion-exclusion table to help managing what is relevant, what should be read further, or what can be discarded. Reference managers will help you to collate your literature and not just make referencing easy, but managing your sources. You'll be able to upload your entire library. If the source is in a PDF format, you can attach it. And you can make notes and comments and organize your literature in that way as well. Okay, then the skimming. So now you've identified relevant literature, but you're still not 100% sure which is really relevant. That's where you're going to be doing some skim reading to go through to see, okay, so this one, okay, a preliminary scan shows it would be worth keeping. So you'll keep it for a thorough reading later, or you will discard it when you realize, okay, it seems superficially relevant, but actually it's not. So the first step is what we call the inclusion-exclusion table. It's also known as the literature synthesis table. It's a straightforward Excel spreadsheet. Leclerc will also share this with the slides afterwards to everybody. But it's useful for breaking down literature into manageable and organizable segments. So an example, let me see if I've got it. Let me open. Yeah, there we go. I thought I had opened it earlier. So basically what it is, and it's to a very large extent, it's the same that you would do with a reference manager, is you break down the source into manageable chunks. So you'll put the author, the year, the title, so the basic bibliographic information would come here. Then the purpose of the argument, the thesis, the purpose of the study, sorry, or the thesis or the argument. There, usually you could put the abstract that you should find in most academic sources. If it's a book that you're looking at, then it might be a bit trickier. So, but there is usually a place where you will find some summary information of what is covered in that source. You can break it down further, looking at the methodology, the experiment, the approach, the sample, the findings, the themes that can then be taken further. And these aren't fixed headings. I mean, this is, if you look at these headings won't necessarily be relevant if you're doing a literature review and you're busy with English literature as the subject. There won't really be a sampling or design or necessarily an experiment or methodology. But there might be an approach. Well, there would still be a methodology, my apologies, and an approach, but not an experiment. So you need to customize this table to meet the type of sources and the type of information you need to pull from it. All right. And then, as I mentioned, reference management tools. Somebody, I think at the start, did mention the issue of just managing the sheer amount of literature that you'll be collecting. There are tools like EndNote 2025, which is the one the university subscribes to, is a great tool to use. But there are open source options like Mendeley and Zotero available as well. But we do recommend, just in terms of stability and support that can be offered, EndNote 25 is the one to go. And we do offer quite comprehensive training on that. There is a training session on EndNote this coming Thursday that Leclerc could also, if you would please just share the link. Okay, but yeah, benefits of the citations of these reference management tools is it keeps all your citations in one place. You can search the papers associated with your sources. You can insert references easily directly into your documents and automatically generate bibliographies as well, which will save you quite a bit of effort. And yeah, so I see there's a question, what are some ways one can go about identifying duplicated sources? Well, that's one benefit. These tools do actually have a feature where they can identify potential duplication. That depends on how large your library is. I mean, if you do import from multiple databases, there is a very good chance that you will have the same one. But the inclusion-exclusion table would also work in that sense if you were to, for instance, just sort your results alphabetically. All right. So then skim reading, you've you've identified through the inclusion-exclusion table, you've now managed to shorten your results. Let's say, okay, you initially had about 300 results. You've now narrowed it down to 150, roughly. And here I'm talking now for a master's thesis that doesn't necessarily require 150 sources. This is just an example. It again does vary, and depending on the study the study will essentially determine how many sources you need to include. But yeah, so you've narrowed it down to 150. That's still quite a lot that you need to work through. And most of them are academic articles. So that's fairly okay because they're quite easy to decide, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? So you'll first look again, okay, so we've got the title, the author, the journal, the bibliographic information. The abstract will give you a fairly good indication of the absolute relevance. If it's a book or a chapter, table of contents can be useful to look at as well. And then the two most important sections of any academic writing would be the introduction and conclusion, to read that and to see how does that fit into your literature review. And then the first sentence of each paragraph, kind of the leading sentence that's supposed to direct the flow of the writing, will also give you a very good overview of what is being covered in an article. So again, looking at a journal article structure, just to give an outline of what each section covers. The abstract is the brief summary of the article. It includes the research question, the methodology, and the results. Introduction is a background of the topic leading up to the aim of the study, and a brief literature review may be included. So, and going back to the question earlier about the research proposal, oftentimes, it's not necessarily the case in all disciplines, but there are some disciplines where the research proposal very often becomes the document that structures the introductory chapter of a thesis. You can very largely adapt it to become your chapter one, your introduction. So, and there is usually already kind of a brief overview of what the literature review will be. It will focus on the key sources, those that have the most significant impact on your own thesis, on your findings, and so on. The methodology section will provide a description of the procedures and how the study was set up and data collected. Results and findings is a presentation of the data from the study, so usually in charts, tables, and visualizations. And then the discussion that follows will discuss this and this data as an analysis of the data, essentially. The conclusion will be usually is a discussion of what the study contributes to the topic in general, and it outlines future research steps that may be addressed, and then the references. Now, a great other source, if you want to find out more about the topic, the reference list is also a great source for finding literature that might be relevant for you. I mean, especially if you found this article to really, or this source to really be valuable, then it's always a good idea to consult the reference list and see what's on offer there. All right, so you've done the skim reading and now you've determined, okay, I have about 50 sources that I feel really can speak to my literature review, that it highlights the gap that I am trying to fill with my research. And now this is the part I think that most people do not enjoy, because it is the reading part. It is the comprehensive reading part. And yeah, I think questions of AI use on summarizing articles and things like that will pop up. But as I said, it's not entirely a gray area, but just remember you cannot just use that summary as the text, because then technically you're not really citing the author, because you didn't read the original text, you just read what a machine interpreted and gave you as the result. And yeah, so that makes it a bit tricky, and that is why it always remains important that the reading part remains important, and it's the best way to develop your learning in the area. So step 5, critically analyze and evaluate. And by evaluating the literature, you can organize your sources according to theme, which will then aid in developing your argument. And this is also where you will begin developing the golden thread. As you identify the themes, you will be able to rank them from most important to least important, and that will help you structure the flow of your writing. So with the inclusion-exclusion table, you should be able to easily get an overview of the literature for your review. So if we go back to that again, just to get an idea of where this becomes very relevant, is that your preliminary breakdown of the sources will provide this information. The themes here at the end is what you will add later once you've done a bit more of a comprehensive reading of each article or source. So, and the themes will allow you to identify common themes among the sources. So you would be able to eventually then say, okay, well, source A, source B, source C has this argument regarding, let's just stick to the topic that I chose, but yeah, generative AI and research integrity. But sources C, D, and E, they have a different approach. They view the use of AI in a positive light, and they think this is how it should be done. And that is essentially what your literature review is going to be. You're not going to basically parrot what each of the sources have to say. You're going to combine, you're going to synthesize your literature. You're going to, and that is where the identification of the themes, the commonalities, the agreements, the disagreements, the gaps are all very important to identify in the literature, because that will definitely allow you to structure and have a proper flow in your writing. Okay, so just back to the slide. So by synthesizing the information, you can determine which of the literature will also be relevant for your review and which will not. So once you've done that, you've done those thematic elements, you might actually realize that there's one or two articles that do still seem relevant, but on a closer reading, they do not tie in with your arguments. It does not, they do not fit in. And that is where it becomes essential then to complete the table for the further analysis, and specifically the thematic column. All right, I'm going to pause there again just to check for some questions. I saw there were quite a lot of questions around Atlas TI, but it's the class seemed to be covering them. But yeah, so I'm not sure if it was said, but essentially the alternative for Atlas TI for the quantitative studies would be SPSS and the quantitative analysis tools that we have available at the university. Just were there other questions, particularly for scope literature or there are research articles that should be excluded when searching a database? For a scoping, okay, so That's another training session that's for a scoping review and a systematic review is a completely different ball game. And we do have some people that, some colleagues that will be presenting a session on that. But your initial scoping review, from what I know, the initial results, the initial search you must not exclude anything. You have to include all the results that you can find, and that is why your search parameters must be very strict and very thorough, so that you really only get that which is absolutely relevant. Okay. So, guess, let me just check this question.
Kirchner, the one that what's the best paraphrasing tool to use during literature review?
Oh, I'll be getting to that when I cover the writing part.
Okay.
Thank you, Ayla. I see here. Okay, so is literature review strictly on the conceptual theoretical framework chapters, or can it be elsewhere? Again, that's very dependent on your faculty, your discipline, and what the structure is they require. They will usually dictate where a literature review should be situated. Sometimes it's incorporated with the introductory chapter that it kind of like uses, it's in both. But yeah, that is definitely something you will have to check with your department. Okay. Now see, what happens if you have found a gap where not a lot of articles or books have been written about it? Do you read a bit more widely in order to see what other themes people may have? Yes, Ms. Muller, I think that would be good. That is actually basically what would happen. When I mentioned at the start, though, if you narrow it down geographically too much, there might not be enough literature. But if there is a really big gap, then you need to kind of associate. So let's say, let's look at an example. I'm just trying to think now. It's very random off the top of my head, but let's say it was a study done on the impact of solar panels on temperature. It's probably nothing, I know, but just because that's what came to my head first. And it was done in a small town in Alaska in the USA. But you have found similar patterns and you want to investigate as well, but there's no writing about it because it hasn't been done in South Africa, then you need to broaden. Then you do need to look at that study and what they did, and you need to contextualize it for the South African context. In which section do writers normally write their arguments? So that is in your introduction and all the other chapters up until your conclusion. So the golden thread again. So your arguments would be, I mean, that is your thesis, is essentially what it boils down to. It is what you're saying. Okay, so this is how this is my point of view. And based on the literature, my point of view is valid. Now let's look at the research that's going to be conducted to support it further. But you constantly need to refer back to your thesis, to your arguments, to your research questions. That is what keeps the golden thread going. But yeah, I will touch on that a bit more when we look at the writing section. Okay, so you've now got your literature, you've got it narrowed down. These are the ones you do want to do a thorough reading of now. And the 5 pillars of literature evaluation that you should consider: authority. Who is the author? Are they a recognized expert in this field, and where are they employed? These days, with Google Scholars profiles, with university websites, you should be able to find this information if you look hard enough. Most authors have got an ORCID profile, which should give a very good overview of their background, their publications, and that should give you an idea of their expertise. I mean, if you were to find that the author is a first-time publisher in the area, that article should likely carry a little less weight than an author who has published over 100 articles on the same topic. But, and yeah, there's always a but, because it's always relevant or always contextual. It's always can be different. I mean, that one author might come with a new approach that is so groundbreaking that nobody else has thought about. This does happen to this day. So again, this is where your own evaluation must come in, and that you must consider and critically look at the writing, the style, the structure. The currency, when was it published? Is the data up to date, outdated, or is it considered a timeless foundational text? This is also very dependent on your area of study. If you're a historian, you're going to be working with outdated and historical texts. If you're a data scientist, you might very well want to look at the most recent developments in the area, and therefore you will look for up-to-date research and not outdated data or outdated research that could, even 10 years old can be outdated. And then the timeless foundational texts, which you won't, sometimes, I mean, if you want to give some background, and this could be depending on the nature of your study, even if you're a data scientist, you might want to refer back to some of the original research that was done simply because of the impact it had and how it has led to where we are today. Or, yeah, I mean, if you're a philosopher, you're looking at texts that are thousands of years old and they still get argued about to this day. Then you want to look at the purpose and the bias. Why was this article written? And is the author or publisher presenting a specific bias or an agenda? And I think in today's climate, this is something that you need to be very careful of. And even with the AI tools that you use, whether there may not be an inherent bias or an inherent objective in what they are trying to share with you. So a great example would be, so if you're examining news articles for your study, news from CNN and Fox will have vastly divergent views. In the South African context, News 24 and the Daily Maverick might be similar, and so will there be ones and so. But depending on the source, and even in an academic context and with academic sources, this bias can creep in, and that this agenda must be read carefully. If there's research being done on immigration in the USA, then you do need to think, okay, who is writing this? Are they very pro-liberal, or they're anti-liberal, or are they absolutely objective? That can be. It could be an objective written work, but this will come with your evaluation of it. The audience as well, and this will help with your evaluation of the purpose and the bias, but is it a peer-reviewed scholarly source? Did it make its way through all the processes to get into a well-established academic journal? Is it just a review or an informative piece meant for the general public? That should also inform you about how careful you should be around purpose and bias. Then relevance, finally. The most critical question, because where you ask, does this article or this source comprehensively cover my topic? Or does it only partially address the research question? That again will indicate where it fits into the importance of how you structure your argument or your line of writing in your literature review. And then in terms of the application, and to look at kind of doing an applied evaluation, you have to look at the organization and the arguments. Is the material logically organized? Is it well written? Were typos left in, simple questions just about the structure of the article. That will give you an idea of the publisher. So whether if it's an academic journal that allowed this to go through, then that journal must be scrutinized and wondered, isn't this perhaps a predatory publisher? And then, is the core argument understandable and supported by evidence? And then finally, to ask the so what test. Is this original research a review of previous research or just a theoretical piece? Well, not just, but and then the action step you would take is, if the source passes the evaluation, you would extract the core findings directly into that inclusion-exclusion table, along with the themes. Then you can exclude it. I believe that step might have been a bit in the wrong place in this presentation, but yeah, it's kind of a cyclical process to keep in mind as well, that as you exclude things from the literature synthesis table, you must add more content to that which you retain within it. Mind mapping, or rather brainstorming, I would say. I think this is where AI might be useful as well, just to get your ideas in place, where you can say, okay, well, these are the topics that's come up, the themes that's come up most relevantly in my reading of the literature. How should I structure it? How would it fit? Or yeah, how are they linked to each other? How are they associated? And so you will look at your big topics. So here, for instance, it was something on social media and political participation. What kind of methodologies, the age and the gender, the USA, these are all kind of thematic elements that will help you to, again, clump together different sources in your literature review. There are open source tools such as CMAP that's available for this mind mapping. It's a nice visual way also if it works, if this works for you. Okay. Finally, once you have now gone through the thorough reading, you've gone through the entire process, you've started with a bunch of sources, you narrowed it down a bit through skim reading and just organizing it in the literature synthesis table. You did a more thorough reading of those that you identified and you updated your literature synthesis table. Now what you should be able to do, based on the literature you have gathered and evaluated, you should be able to interpret the current understanding about your topic and be able to determine how the literature impacts your research questions. So that is ultimately what the literature review is supposed to reflect, is your keen understanding of the topic that you are discussing. And it's supposed to highlight how you have identified a gap therein or a potential contribution to an argument or against an argument. That is what the literature review is for. It's supposed to situate your argument, your thesis, within the greater body of knowledge that's been written about this topic. And it should, in some shape or form, answer your research question and impact your knowledge and understanding of the topic. And therefore, even literature that contradicts your research question and provisional answer should be included. You must look at all the aspects, at the arguments, the counter arguments. If you provide literature that only supports your thesis, then you either need to properly justify to say that there is no other literature available, or it might be assumed that you omitted literature that went counter to your thesis. And remember that those who will be reading this, the examiners and the supervisor, they are experts in this field. They already know which sources should be there. They will be keeping an eye out for whether those sources have been consulted or not. Okay, so I'm going to pause quickly again because I saw a few questions came in. Okay.
Sorry, the one, how old must good recent sources be? What must one do if the source is outdated but have invaluable information that you can find in any recent work? I assume that differs from discipline to discipline.
I believe so. That's the last question actually is a bit of a conundrum because that does happen. That sometimes there really is, but again, I mean, it really does depend on the discipline. Because some would allow it, some would be a bit more lenient. And I mean, of course, if you've got 50 sources and one or two of them are on the older side, then that doesn't matter. But if all of them are on the older side, that is where the problem comes in. So that is what you should consider. So, I mean, like, yeah, one really, really won't count against you. But if it forms the core of your argument and it does come out later that there was more recent information sources available, that could be an issue as well. And when writing the research project, can you still use the journals that you used during the proposal, or do you need to source more journals? No, you can absolutely use those that you used in the proposal, but you need to supplement them with more. If you did such a thorough job in your research proposal that you literally covered everything, that would be quite impressive. And I think but again, it does depend on how much is available in the field, but it will always be expected that you do a more thorough investigation in your literature review. Okay, let's see, let's carry on. Okay, so now we're at the writing section. So the very first thing, especially for those who are out of practice with writing, who haven't written a lot in a long time, just get it written. Don't worry about getting it right at the start. Just write down your thoughts. Stream of consciousness process where you basically just get your thoughts on paper. This is where drafting becomes very useful. This will also help you connect the dots between themes, between topics, between subjects in the literature that you have identified. Write early, write often, and because practice makes perfect. Don't wait until you've compiled all of your literature together to then start writing. Make it a continuous process throughout. And then start writing for yourself. Write so that you can understand what it is that you are trying to convey. And it sounds kind of contradictory, but it's often, I think, something that people do struggle with, is just getting their thoughts on paper and making it make sense, even to themselves. And following that is when you want to write to be understood. And it's very helpful, I've found in my experience, was to kind of imagine that there's somebody standing behind you and they're reading what you're writing. This person, they're layperson, they're intelligent, but they're not in your field, they don't have any background there. But will they be able to follow what you're trying to write in the literature review? I mean, not the technical aspects and so on, but will they understand your argument, what you're trying to convey, what you are trying to suss out? It is helpful, and there it is usually also quite there it is also helpful to have a friend or somebody who can assist you in just having a look at your writing and giving their honest opinions. I think, Mr. Mateus, we did answer the question on how old a source must be. We said it is related to the discipline. It does depend. If it's an old source, but the rest of your sources are recent, then then it should be fine. But if all your sources are old, then that could be problematic. But it really does depend on the discipline. And yeah, good recent sources, I would say, again, it depends, but roughly 5 years is these days kind of the accepted measure. Previously, it was 10 years. But I mean, with the rate of change, and again, depending on the field and the discipline, this will vary as well. Okay, so things to avoid after your first rough draft: long quotations, rather paraphrase. And now we get to that question about earlier about what's the best paraphrasing tool. And I think honestly, they're all pretty on the same level at this stage. Grammarly obviously is an established one. And yeah, so I mean, if you use Grammarly to help you correct your typos, misspellings, sentence structure, and so on. But if you do use tools that will convert quotes from books into paraphrased text, that you will have to acknowledge in your declaration around AI. That is something that you do need to declare, because again, it might distort what is actually being said. So you need to tread very carefully. You need to be very sure that the paraphrase is correct, and you still need to cite the original source and give credit. Yeah, be neat and tidy in your presentation. Poor formatting and referencing, it really can have a negative impact on your paper and how it is evaluated. Imagine being a professor that's an examiner of somebody's paper, and they find an excellently formatted one, and then one that's really just thrown together. It's poorly structured. The chapters are nonsensical. They will have, no matter how good your argument is, they will have a very negative view from the outset on that paper. So both of these as well, apart from what can help, the AI tools that can help you, remember also that we have a language lab at the university that can assist you in getting your writing up to scratch, helping you to paraphrase yourself. Because again, and this is the important part also where AI use is risky, is that you are at some point might have to stand for an examination, an oral examination, where you will be questioned about your paper or your thesis. And they might be asking sections that you actually use this paraphrasing tool for, and yeah, you might hit a blank simply because you never properly embedded that knowledge. So that is something just to be very, very aware of. So it is good to consult with the language lab on how to do this paraphrasing yourself, how to put somebody else's thoughts into your own words for your own understanding, and then still giving credit to that original author. Secondary sources as well, where possible, and this is not always possible, we realize that, but try and go to the original work wherever possible. That's the standard good practice. But yeah, sometimes that source is just not available anymore, and you will have to you might have to revert to that secondary source. Again, back to the golden thread line of argument. And basically, and I think this is the important part of what should be understood for it, is that it's a consistent argument or theme that runs throughout your research. It links the research problem, the objectives, the literature, and findings into a cohesive, logical narrative, and ensures that all the chapters and arguments directly answer the central so what question of the research. And that's very important to keep the flow going in your writing. So, and signposts, but not just the headings and the subheadings, but constantly referring back to your thesis, constantly referring back to your research questions, and connecting what you're writing to that is a standard practice and is expected to keep that flow going, because it also keeps your eye on the ball. So, and you'll find this, especially if you do go and read theses and dissertations that others have written in a lot of fields, you will see that they constantly refer back to the thesis, to the arguments, to the research questions, and they will literally just rewrite them before continuing almost. So, but the titles, the headings, and the subheadings will also assist with the golden thread. There must be a natural flow in your structure. So you will start with your introductory paragraph in your chapter, introductory section, which will give an overview of the core arguments that you have identified in the literature, the gaps that you have identified. Then there will be a section on the main argument for, another section, main argument against. If this is how it's structured, this is just an example. Again, it might just be, okay, this is one point of view, this is another point of view, here's this third point of view, and here's the gap where there's very little writing, but this is the writing I was able to find, and this is kind of where my research wants to fall into. Or my argument, there is yeah, so that's basically an idea of how it would be structured. And then further, the authority. You should reflect your knowledge of the existing literature. This is also where the risk of you being overly dependent on AI can become risky, is that this will not necessarily, the literature review may not necessarily reflect your authority. And will it be apparent in your bibliography? Again, as I mentioned earlier, some researchers, they know the experts in their field. They know the core writings in their field, and they will be looking for those sources. Okay, so in terms of the writing content and the structure, here's what you'll find here to a large extent. Okay, so we've got the introduction for the chapter, we've got the body for the chapter, we've got the conclusion for the chapter. But I mean, obviously for a thesis, you've got the introduction to the thesis, you've got the body chapters. It all follows the same kind of structure. Even a paragraph follows this same essential structure. So going to the introduction, and it will explain, the introduction should explain the focus of the literature review. So it will highlight the core arguments. It will establish the importance of the subject, give the necessary background as well in a summative way. And then it will give a brief overview of what kind of work has been done on the topic by identifying any controversies within the field, and any other research which has raised questions about earlier assumptions. And then some background or history. So this is a place where older text might be relevant. And then the purpose or thesis statement. And as I mentioned, so you will keep on tying your writing to your thesis statement. The body will consist of headings and subheadings. It will summarize and evaluate the key arguments, the key points of view, thereby allowing you to identify the major themes on topics, the most important trends, and those findings about which researchers agree or disagree. And this is also where you will likely be starting to be situating your own thesis, your own research questions as well. You will tie briefly to it in the introduction. In the body, you should give a bit more depth about it. And in the conclusion, that is where you will draw a direct line. So the paragraph structure, as I mentioned, the topic sentence, that's kind of like the introductory sentence. It's usually the first sentence, presents the focus of the paragraph, it foregrounds the content of the whole paragraph, and it should increase the text readability. And this is a good practice. And remember when we spoke about skim reading, that a lot of times it's advisable just to read the first sentence of a paragraph. So in that way, to again, keep the golden thread going, keep the flow going. The supporting sentences and the development, that's the argument that explains or proves or supports the topic sentence. The evidence is provided. You would say authors A, B, and C, they say this. And then you will elaborate perhaps on what each of them specifically has to say. Concluding the transition sentence, it sums up the arguments. So again, it will just kind of could to an extent be a bit of a repeat of what was said in the paragraph, a summary essentially. But it ties what you said in that paragraph to the next paragraph. It should link to it. And there should be a seamless transition. That would be the ideal. Now, again, the funnel approach is a good way to consider how you're going to structure your literature review. In the same way that you would in your introduction, you will give a broad overview, a background of what the topic is. You're going to give some indication of what's going to be covered and so on. And then you start narrowing down as you progress from chapter to chapter if you were thinking about the whole thesis. So for a specific chapter, it follows the same approach. The introductory section will have a bit of a broad overview. You'll give a bit of a background of Gen AI and how it's just kind of sprung up over the past couple of years to having a massive impact. Then you will start narrowing it down. Your first section, you will be looking at the themes of Gen AI and higher education and how has this impacted higher education, not just research, but teaching and learning as well. And then you'll go a bit more specific and you'll look at the impact on academic integrity. And then you'll look at the consequences specifically. And then your topic, then you will narrow it down in your concluding section where you will tie everything together and say, basically looking to answer the question, how does Gen AI impact academic integrity in higher education? So yeah, this is a good way to just consider how you're going to line up your argumentation, line up the importance of the themes and the topics that you will be covering in your writing. And then the conclusion of the chapter, as with any source, essentially, it summarizes the evidence, it shows its significance, it highlights the gaps, and it indicates also how previous research leads to your own research projects. So it's basically a summary, and you say, okay, this is what everybody said, this is how I situate my position within that argument, and this is why my research is important. Okay, and that's basically it in terms of where to from here. As I mentioned, get in touch with your faculty librarian, consult the library guides that's available to you. Contact the Writing Lab. We even offer consultations in the Research Commons here at the library if you want to have in-person meetings with them. But they do offer virtual meetings as well, and it's free of charge. But again, don't wait until a week before you must submit, and your supervisor came back and said, okay, wait, no, everything, the writing is horrible, it needs to be redone. Walk a journey with them. So make early appointments and get started. It really is a good idea. And then the workshops on offer by the postgraduate office. I think Atlas TI's one was shared here, but they do offer a lot of others, including a very comprehensive workshop on thesis writing. And so that is worth looking at. Okay, so yeah, we're open to questions again. And let's see. Okay. Does the referencing style also depend on the faculty? Yes, and sometimes even the department. For instance, economic and management sciences, they use both SU Harvard style and also the APA, depending. So industrial psychology will be using APA. But yeah, this you'll have to also just double check, and your faculty librarian can give you that answer if you are unsure. Is the funnel approach used per chapter, per paragraph, or both? I think for a paragraph, it would be a bit hard, but there would be cases where you can use it, definitely, and then others where not. Those guidelines that I gave about the topic sentence, about the body section and the transition sentence, that's a good guideline, but remember, it can't always necessarily follow that rigid structure. Sometimes a topic has to be covered over 2 or 3 paragraphs, but then it's still good to have that transition sentence that links and explains, okay, so, yeah. Okay, so, yeah, is the Atlas TI workshop available online? If I'm correct, I think it's only available online, but I'm not 100% sure. Are there any other questions? You're welcome to unmute yourselves. If you want me to go over anything again, we did end a little early, but that's not always a bad thing. Okay, doesn't look like it. So I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody. I will put my email in the chat. If you do have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to email me. And yes, yeah, so good luck with the writing.
Thank you, Kirchner.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Kirchner, for the presentation. By the look of the comments in the chat, I can tell that the participants found the session valuable. I'm going to also thank the attendees for your presence and participation in the session. And we also look forward to seeing you in our future webinars. We've got a EndNote training happening this Thursday. The workshop happening tomorrow is only for academic staff, so you won't be able to attend that one. All right, with all that, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. We will share the recording with you as well as the presentation slides as soon as the recording finishes to process and save. All right, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.